Parliament will today begin an inquiry and a summit into gang-related violence in Cape Town, but also there's a wider reaching effect in other parts of the country as well. It brings together the victims, the communities, the civil society, experts to look beyond just short-term policing responses, wants to examine the gang economy, the lack of intelligence, policing capacity. Where is the NPA? Also, possible collusion, corruption with the state and police and gangsters. Ian Cameron is the chairperson of the Parliamentary Portfolio Committee on Police. Good morning, Ian. What would make this summit different from the many previous interventions into gang violence that have failed to produce a lasting change? Ian, good morning.
Morning, Lester. So I think it's critical that obviously we would have a responsibility to ensure that we follow up on the recommendations. But I think it's more important to emphasize that this isn't just a summit for one day and then it's over. It's the start of a broader gang inquiry, and we'd like to have quite a few more summits in the near future to get more people together. I think what's critical about today is that we want to launch the broader gang inquiry with the input of community members. I think so often we sit in boardrooms with police, etc., and we want to speak strategy, but we don't have the buy-in of the community. And I think what makes today unique is the fact that we've got these neighborhood watchers, etc., that will be joining us and giving their input to ultimately kick off the gang violence inquiry.
How much of Cape Town's and South Africa's gang problem is actually about policing? And how much is driven by poverty, unemployment, and the legacy of apartheid in creating dysfunctional communities?
I think it all plays a role. Obviously you would need an integrated strategy to address it. I think it's unrealistic to think you can simply police the problem, right? But that being said, there are many places in the world where poverty plays a role, where we don't see the type of gang violence that we see. And we also don't see the frequency of especially extreme violence that goes along in certain parts with some of these gangs, and almost the nonchalant normality of some of this violence. So I think, there's an even deeper social fabric question that we need to ask. We need to, for example, determine what role would, for example, basic education play, what would social development do, etc. Obviously, from our point of view, we're focusing a lot on the policing side of things, policing and likely touching on the justice elements of it. But certainly, it needs a broad, integrated approach.
Are our priorities correct in South Africa? And I look at the difference between the budget of the police's VIP protection unit, 4.2 billion rand spent on VIP protection. There's something like 118 individuals outside of the executive branch, the president, deputy president, cabinet ministers, for which the SAPS provides VIP protection. That budget is 4.2 billion rand. But if I look at the police's anti-gang unit, it receives a tiny fraction of that amount, about 35 million rand annually. And we think of the number of people affected just in Cape Town. If I look at Khayelitsha, if I look at Mitchell's Plain, and I would guesstimate just over 1 million people in those communities, it doesn't seem as if our priorities are right here.
No, they certainly aren't. This is a ongoing struggle and a fight that we have with every single budget process. Even more important to highlight, a lot of people have this protection more as a kind of a luxury item than what it is determined by a threat and risk assessment that should indicate whether any kind of protection is necessary. And even then, one needs to consider, where do we draw the line? In terms of budget of AGU, for example, I can take it even further, Lester. If we look at Cape Town TRT, for example, of the police, they don't even have their own email address. They don't have any form of IT software. If we look at anti-gang unit, they struggle to see even 3 or 4 million rand a year for a budget, and they really, really struggle to make ends meet. And this is a unit that's responsible for so much. They have done remarkable work in the past, obviously with their own challenges too. but they simply do not have the senior, let's call it leadership, that really strategically ensures that they have the resources that they so desperately need.
Ian, in May, police in Grassy Park recovered 9 SAPS case dockets. They found a magistrate's court stamp during a raid at a private residence. They found rounds of ammunition. This has come with other reports, other allegations of collusion between police and gangsters in Cape Town. Is the committee prepared to confront the failures within SAPS, particularly crime intelligence, the specialized policing units, looking at the evidence of criminal gangs infiltrating, corrupting parts of the police and the criminal justice system?
Absolutely. We'll communicate with a lot of the community structures as well, but we've already been inundated with just messages, anonymous messages, of saying, look here, scratch there, this is where there is potential or alleged collusion, etc. Last week we had a joint oversight visit with the Joint Standing Committee on Defence to Aisterplaat and also Mitchell's Plain to assess Operation Prosper. And the long and the short of it is that even amongst ground level police and ground level soldiers, they even say the same thing. They say that there's no use in them trying to do certain operations because they get to a place and clearly someone from within the authorities have tipped off the alleged gangsters, and they get to a property known for smuggling something or storing something, and they get there and there's just nothing. So absolutely, I think a lot of that will be highlighted. It's also important, Lester, maybe to say that just over a decade ago it was the Khayelitsha Commission, and it's important to say we can now use this as an opportunity to assess how much of that was actually implemented.
Ian Cameron, Chair of the Parliamentary Committee on Police.